In this week's video, I want to talk about the massive policy changes and undertakings as we are seeing in the Canadian government right now, namely by the Liberal government in the announcement with Build Canada, and my concerns on how this might actually backfire and instead of solving the housing affordability crisis, might make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And as we do a deep dive in this video, we're going to go through what the different concerns are, how it might potentially play out, and definitely in the comments, let me know what you think of this policy, how it is going to play out in the next decade going forward, and what you see as the pros, cons, and concerns. And I would love to have that discussion with you because I do want to be challenged on this topic. I do not admit to know everything, and there is still so much yet to be seen because it's in such early stages. But I think it is one crucial topic that really needs to be spoken about because it's going to have a significant impact on future generations. So first off, what exactly is this new Build Canada housing plan that they've announced? Well, the plan is that the government is going to create a new arm in the government, essentially a separate group that's responsible for building affordable housing, and spend way over 12 to 13 billion dollars in creating these affordable homes. How much? 4,000 homes to start off with, and then they are expected to scale up to 45,000 homes. And for now, it is scheduled in 6 cities around Canada. So now, where exactly is this 12 to 13 billion dollars going to come from? It obviously is not something the government just has lying on the side, and they can't be raising it through taxes because that's the worst move they could possibly do right now after getting elected. So instead, what they do is rack up more debt. And the government lately, over the past couple years, hasn't exactly had the best track record when it comes to government spending. Our sovereign debt is going through the roof, and every year we tend to spend more and more money. In 2025, the budget that was supposed to come out at the start of the year, right after the elections, was delayed, and they didn't release that. And now, just as they are about to release it in the next month, Mark Carney, right around when he announces the housing plan, that's when he comes and says that the budget is expected to have significantly more deficits than we did last year, and to expect that when the budget comes out. Now, to me, that's all just a distraction, but let's see if it's going to be really worth it. Let's break it down a little further. How exactly does the government get new debt? Through the sale of bonds. So generally, you'll have a buyer who subscribes and wants to purchase the bonds of the Canadian government, and then using that money, the government is then able to spend and invest and get additional debt. And then after the expiry on maturity of that bond, they are expected to pay a certain percentage back to the bond owner. However, as we've seen before, what happens when the bond market dries up? That is, you do not have enough people wanting to buy the government bonds, either because of lack in confidence of where the economy is going, or lack of confidence in the ability of the government to actually pay it back. So in usual cases, when the government has to pay that money back, and if they're not able to, what do they resort to? The money printer. So the government has access to print more money in times of distress or when they need to then borrow more debt to pay off the old debt. It's like taking a new credit card to pay off the old credit card or refinancing your mortgage again. We saw this during COVID time when the government had to spend huge amounts of money rapidly into the economy to save it, and instead what they ended up doing was quantitative easing, where they had to print the money themselves to buy those bonds and refinance themselves into a longer term. And as you can see, the amount of bonds on the balance sheet of the government keeps going up for the Bank of Canada. And then now, since then, they've been trying to work themselves back down, which is why we are in what we call the quantitative tightening phase. So quantitative easing is when you put more money into the economy through the purchase of bonds and investments. And once you start putting those bonds back into the market for bond buyers to purchase, that's when you go into quantitative tightening and you slowly release those bonds back. However, of course, there's no such thing as free money. So then where exactly does all of this money come from, or what is the cost to it? And the cost is the devaluation of the dollar. So one of the things you would have felt is all the things around you get more expensive. Because your dollar now holds lesser value when compared to commodities, and you need to pay more when it comes to imports and exports. So because of that, the Canadian economy has now been on a downward trajectory where the dollar value is held lesser and lesser. And usually this can be combated with increase in productivity or improvement in industrial R&D and research, and where you have innovations happen, and then you're able to improve your GDP overall and get into a better health. However, with a declining economy and the government borrowing more money on itself, what happens is the devaluation of the dollar. Now, this is what brings me to my point where what happens when the dollar value goes down. So if the dollar value continues going down, what's going to end up happening is asset prices go up. So generally things such as stocks, commodities, real estate will go up because those are hard value assets versus liquid cash where it is completely derived as a product of where the currency of the economy is held in terms of global value. Now, on the flip side of all this, sure, this is where the rich get richer because they already own those assets. They've already invested their liquid cash into different assets around the world, either purchasing property, real estate within Canada or US and other countries, but also through stock investments, hard commodities such as gold, silver, etc. And that's where you need to learn to diversify your investments so that you're well protected against the currency decline. However, my major concerns and reason for why I think there is inevitable failure somewhere down the road is because what we then would end up with in this scenario is a significant amount of debt as far as sovereign debt goes, and unfortunately the future generations will have to pay the cost. Now, on the flip side of all of this, if ideally everything plays out according to plan and we get the social housing at an affordable cost that we really need for Canada, can that actually happen? And here are where my concerns come in. For something like this to actually be successful and be done right, there are a lot of factors more than just the construction or the modular housing or the use and technique of trades to get this done. Some of the factors that make me think that a plan like this will not end up being successful is, number one, just the given proven track record of the Canadian government. Their level of inefficiencies and the amount that they fight internally just to get anything done right, and the amount of political ploys that we have to go through to try and get anything done right now in Canada is very painful. And so that makes me think that creating an entirely additional arm of the government that is responsible for this, the amount of red tape and bureaucracy that we will be facing when it comes to the inefficient spending of this money is going to be massive. And it'll be years before all of that gets reported and the results are even seen. And finally, we will fight back against that. The program might get shut down or changed. Now, I know it's in very early stages, but this is potentially something that we have to be aware of as a consequence of all this spending that's going to happen. The second factor for something like this to be successful is the regulation of the supply. So generally in past, when other countries have done this, when you do it in spurts where you release a huge amount of supply in a single given time, it is usually less successful because you're not able to monitor and control the demand and supply over an extended period of time, because the real estate market always has ups and downs in terms of swing. And if you pass on a lot of that potential release in supply already in the first phase, if you do not pace that out over time, then that's when you'll have certain issues. And that is something that the government absolutely has to make part of this program, to release the supply slowly over time, but continuously keep doing it and regulate what ends up happening. Because for every one property that is out, one property should be coming in to the market as supply. Third factor that makes me a bit concerned is, does anyone even really want these affordable housing units that they're building? If you've seen the prefab units that are coming out of the factories, they're not quite exactly your general standard homes. And the other part is the lands that the government will be releasing are not exactly in city centers. A lot of these are protected lands outside city centers. And so these are going to create a separation between people who already existing own homes the land where those homes are will still hold their premium value for being accessible, having those amenities around, being in those premium communities. And then these are going to become your general social housing outside the city. And so that association and separation between in society for social housing, affordable housing versus people already who are able to own homes, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to pan out. Generally, in a lot of other countries, when you build these massive concrete buildings that are meant to be social housing centers, you just get an absolute lack of any amenities, profitable businesses, or anything show up in those areas. They end up becoming high crime rate places because of the amount of poverty there and because of the lack of services to those places. And then eventually they just become ghost towns, an additional burden for the government to maintain. So I haven't yet seen the plans because they haven't released them yet, but I'm curious where exactly these locations are in each city that they've announced, and how different is it really going to be to what we define as home ownership right now in Canada. All in all, while I do think it is a good initiative and it is a move in the right direction, but I do think that the government taking on so much responsibility themselves and having to spend that much money for something that I think personally is very tricky when it has to be managed by the government, because you have to understand a lot of these costs are not just the initial construction, it's also the maintenance of these new areas now needs to be undertaken by the government. And so there's ongoing costs, and it has to pass on from one government to the next. So when there's re-elections, will these programs be cut? Will the funding be cut? Because we do not even have that much money to be spending in surplus for projects like this. And so while I totally believe in affordable housing and people need that in Canada right now, I'm not entirely sure this project is going to do it. Meanwhile, all of this debt that we are continuing to rack, not just for this program, but other programs in Canada, will devalue the dollar, resulting in asset prices going up. And that's why I highly recommend you invest your money at all times into some form of asset and diversify it. Real estate is not the only answer, but if you don't have real estate, then you definitely do want to invest in real estate at the right time, but also get into commodities, get into stocks, and diversify your portfolio. Because unfortunately, we can't really stop these programs or have a say in how they will work and play out. But we can at least look at countries in the past that have implemented something like this and then what the impact has ended up being. But then also take example of how Canadian policies have worked out over the last couple of years and where that has got us as an economy overall in terms of the amount of debt that we have racked up, but also the difficult situation that we've put ourselves in as far as what the future generations need to fix. So I hope you find value in this video, and it gives you an in-depth understanding of this program and how things can play out, and puts you in a position where you can make better decisions to either invest or position yourself differently so that you can at least be on the better side of how this all plays out in a decade's time. And again, definitely let me know in the comments what your opinion about all of this is, how you think it's going to play out, and I would love to have those discussions with you. I do want to be challenged on this, and I would love to know what different people around Canada, different areas think, especially the cities where these projects are actually coming to. What are your first signs and what you're seeing? Definitely let me know, and let's see and hope, wish that I'm wrong.